Welcome, everybody. We're so happy that you've joined us. Fraudulent activity targeting older Americans is on the rise. Cryptocurrency kiosks, also known as crypto ATMs, are virtual currency kiosks, can be found in your supermarkets, convenience stores, gas stations, bars, and restaurants. Crypto kiosks often look like ATMs and allow people to conduct legitimate cryptocurrency transactions, such as sending money in digital wallets. However, because crypto kiosks are largely unregulated at the state level compared to traditional financial institutions like banks and other money services, they lack similar fraud protections. ARP North Dakota jumped into action to help fight by working with state legislators earlier this year to pass a law to put an end to this criminal behavior and better protect older North Dakotans from their life savings. On today's webinar, I'm joined by Jan Murtha with the North Dakota Department of Financial Institutions and Francois Cleveland, an AERP Government Affairs Director on the Financial Security and Livable Communities team. To get us started, we're going to share a recent news story on the rise of cryptocurrency kiosk scams.
Chances are you've walked by one of these Bitcoin ATMs. ARP estimates there are more than 45,000 of these machines across the country. And this morning, we found that they've increasingly become a tool of sophisticated criminal networks trying to separate Americans from their money.
Hello.
She's at $23,000 already.
Where's she at right now?
You're watching a cryptocurrency scam caught in real time.
Yes.
Can I talk to you for a second?
Please, I have the bank on the phone.
Okay, let me talk to who you're talking to on the bank.
I'm in danger.
Okay, stop putting money in there.
Fran Bates is loading tens of thousands of dollars of her life savings into something called a Bitcoin ATM.
No, you're not.
And is one click away from losing it all.
Don't click, I'm done. Do not click anything.
Over the course of 2 days, a scammer convinced the 85-year-old her bank account had been hacked and she needed to put her money into a machine she'd never seen before for safety.
True. That's
it seems
exactly
so
what
hard to believe.
I know, and you think if you had to listen to it, you would wonder what's going on with that woman. Doesn't she realize what they're doing to her? No, you don't. It's a horrible experience.
Fran is just one of dozens of victims ABC News and our own television stations have found whose scams ended at a Bitcoin ATM, a machine popular in gas stations, supermarkets, and liquor stores that experts tell us scammers are increasingly using as a tool to separate Americans from their hard-earned cash.
They look pretty much like a regular ATM. The difference is you don't really get money out of them. You put money in and buy cryptocurrency.
Data from the FBI shows Americans collectively lost nearly $250 million to scams using Bitcoin ATMs in 2024, more than double from the previous year.
These are all transnational criminal groups. Yeah, these are not one-off guys in grandma's basement.
Adam Zarazinski, a crypto forensics expert, tracks the sophisticated criminal networks behind these scams and explained why he believes more isn't being done by the companies operating these machines.
Money. It's money.
They have a financial incentive to let people be scammed?
Yep, because they make a percent on every transaction.
And while the vast majority of these victims never see a dime back,
No, listen to me. Do you really want to fight this fight with me?
for Fran Bates, a police lieutenant intervened just in time after Mindy Jordan, a quick-thinking bystander at that gas station, called 911.
I hate when somebody tries to take advantage of somebody that's not able to protect themselves.
The pair reunited here for the first time.
She was my angel.
Your angel.
Yes, she rescued me.
And lawmakers have taken notice of these Bitcoin ATMs. At least 17 states, according to ARP, have passed laws restricting or outright banning them. Experts tell us that if you think you're being scammed, you can always call the ARP fraud hotline or law enforcement to get immediate help.
Well, it was such a powerful story that Fran shared. And I would tell you that during the legislative session, we heard many stories similar to Fran that really show the rise of the cryptocurrency fraud kiosk scams and why we were so instrumental in working with our partners across the state to make sure that we could put some important consumer protections in place during the 2025 legislative session. Now, let's get you involved in this webinar. We're going to do a quick anonymous poll question, which you should see pop up on your screen. Have you seen a cryptocurrency ATM or kiosk in your community? So you can answer yes, no, or you're not sure. So we're seeing that auto-populate right now. And as we do that, I think we'll have some great reactions to it. And for now, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Francois Cleveland from the Government Affairs team. Francois, it's good to see you this afternoon.
Hi there. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, you can see the answers are popping up right in front of us, and it looks like it's about 50-50. Some folks have seen cryptocurrency kiosks in their community, and some folks haven't. I think what was unique about that ABC video is that often they blend right in, don't they? They look like a regular ATM, so you often don't even know what they are, or don't suspect that they're anything different than what you see normally in your community.
Yeah, when we first started working on this year at the beginning of 2024, most people didn't even know what a crypto kiosk or an ATM was. There's been a lot of education campaigns, so I'm glad to see those numbers are going up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was something that we learned a lot about early on in 2025, even just educating legislators about what cryptocurrency kiosks looked like, how many of them were located in their communities. I think we had a lot of eye-opening conversations early on in the legislative session, and they really bought into why consumer protections were so important. North Dakota joined other states. We were second in the nation to pass this cryptocurrency fraud protection bill, and I know many others have joined us, and you're starting to see some trends across the country. So with that, I will turn it over to you.
Right. Thank you, everybody, again for joining us today. It's so important to keep up with the latest information on fraud prevention. And I encourage you to talk with everyone you know about what you're hearing today and share that information with those you love and your neighbors, because you never know who you can prevent from being a victim of fraud. So let's dive in. So the question is worth asking, why does AARP care so much about fraud? We have our Fraud Watch network, we have our Fraud Watch helpline. We dedicate lots of space in our bulletins and magazines to the topic. We're involved in national think tanks and stakeholder groups and regulars testifying before Congress on fraud. And the answer is because older adults are disproportionately impacted by it. I'm sure you know somebody that's been a victim of fraud, or you've yourself have been a victim of fraud. It impacts your friends, your neighbors, your family. This is what I like to call the Kevin Bacon question. If you recall years ago, you could connect any actor or actress in Hollywood to Kevin Bacon through the movies that he was in. It was called the 7 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. And I would say you only need 1 or 2 degrees from you to find someone that you know is a fraud victim, or it was you yourself. In fact, I would bet in the last hour you've received a spam text or call. So we are attached to the number one way criminals get to us, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, access directly to you by criminals. But they also come in all sorts of ways. I'm talking about the phone, obviously, but they come to you through computers, phone calls, text messages, and criminals are relentless. On the slide, you can see some examples of text messages. The first one is the first one I ever received. It says, "Hi, I love that dress on you yesterday at church. Where'd you get it?" And I responded, it caught me off guard because I'm like, wait a second. I wasn't wearing a dress yesterday, and it took me a minute. It leverages my instinct to be helpful. I responded, and oh, I don't think you have the right number, or whatever that might be. And then that just shows that it's a constantly changing. Any of us can be caught in that situation where they don't know the latest way that criminals are getting to us. The second one, you have a toll charge that's overdue. I don't know about in North Dakota, but in my state, I live in Idaho. We don't have toll roads. So this one didn't play to me, but imagine if you're on the East Coast where you're driving through toll roads all the time. It really can to speak to people of, oh my gosh, I've got this toll charge. Someone wants to talk to me. My shipment's been delayed. You want to be helpful. Oh yeah. You got lost. The number, I dropped my phone, dropped all the contacts. Yeah, I mean that who doesn't? Tech issues happen too. But tons of people respond to these text messages. And it's just the criminal's way of getting into your phone, into your financial situations to victimize you and take your money. So unfortunately, fraud in America is at a crisis level. So AARP has done numerous studies looking at the number of people affected by fraud and found in 2024 that 42% of adults, that's 141 million people, have had money or information stolen from them. And in 2025, we did another poll or survey last month and found that 89% of adults reported as being targeted or experienced some type of scam. The FBI numbers show a dramatic increase from the 800 million in fraud losses in 2014 to 2024, when they found that 16.6 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars was stolen. And this is an almost 2,000% increase in fraud losses over the last decade. And we know that's actually likely to be a very low estimate. The FTC actually estimated that the true overall losses in 2023, when they were adjusted for underreporting, was $158 billion. And that was $61 billion for older adults. So while there's hundreds of ways that criminals get to you through scams, you've got your romance scams, you've got your text scams, your extortion scams, all those types of things, the common denominator of payment type helps us to focus on an effective way to limit the amount lost. And so in this instance, we're looking at crypto kiosks and how those mechanisms are used in scam. So if we target the payment method of how money changes hands, then we can stop the harm. So law enforcement says the priority in fraud is to do three things. First one is to stop the bleeding, stop the victim from losing any more money, then recover anything you can, and then the last one, arrest the bad guy. So by targeting the payment methods used, we can help stop the bleeding. So let's talk a little bit about what a crypto kiosk is and how the scams work. And to that, we're going to look to our friend Amy Novzinger, who is in charge of our Fraud Watch helpline. She put together this video, and I'm going to share this with you here. And we're going to have to skip through the ad here real fast.
My energy bill dropped from $150 to $50 by doing this. My friends laughed at me when I spent.
Crypto ATMs look a lot like regular ATMs. You might not even notice you've passed one in the grocery store or gas station. But the way they work is totally different. These machines aren't connected to banks. They are used by people to convert cash into cryptocurrency, but criminals are using them as a payment method in their scams. Here's how crypto ATM scammers steal millions from consumers. In a crypto ATM scam, fraudsters trick victims into withdrawing their own cash and depositing it into a cryptocurrency kiosk to purchase virtual currency that's then sent to a scammer's crypto wallet. Confusing, right? Scammers love cryptocurrency because it has the benefit of not being well understood by most consumers, and it can be difficult to trace. And while scams like this come in all shapes and sizes, they often start with a false sense of urgency. It could be an out-of-the-blue communication from what you think is your utility company, saying your account is delinquent and they are sending someone to cut off your electricity unless you can pay now. Or it could be from someone claiming to be from your bank, saying someone is actively hacking your account, and the solution is to move money out of it and into another account now. The list goes on, but the next step is the same. They direct you to withdraw a certain amount of cash from your bank and head to the nearest crypto ATM. They might even give you directions on how to get there. So helpful. Then they give you specific instructions on how to deposit the cash into the machine and send it. Once you complete the transaction, you might think you've taken care of your problem, but the reality couldn't be farther from the truth. What you've done without realizing it is you've converted your money into cryptocurrency and given it to the criminal. Once that transaction happens, the scammer stops communicating with you, and you start to realize it was a scam from the beginning and your money's been stolen. Because cryptocurrency is not backed by any government institution and transactions can be tough to trace, the chances of getting your money back are slim, which is a big benefit for criminals who steal millions and dodge law enforcement. The bottom line is that no bank, business, or government agency will seek payment through a crypto ATM. So protect yourself. If you do get an urgent message from your bank or a utility or even a friend, contact them directly. If the message didn't come from them, disengage. Any problem that must be solved with money sent through a crypto ATM is a scam. Full stop. For more information on cryptocurrency and scams, Go to aarp.org/cryptofraud.
So according to the FBI, in 2024, Americans lost $9.3 billion to crypto-related fraud. That's out of that $16.6 billion in losses that we talked about earlier over all asset types. So the 9.3 billion is a 66% increase in losses from last year. And you'll see at the bottom of your screen there that the most money was stolen from those who are 60 and older. So while crypto made up just about 17% of complaints, it accounted for a staggering 56% of total losses. And this tells us that crypto fraud is disproportionately being exploited by criminals. And again, we know that this is an underreported number. So this slide right here is dedicated just to theft through the crypto kiosks. Zeroing in on what these numbers are provided by 2024 IC3 report. The bar on the far right of your screen, that's the amount of money stolen from those 60 and older compared to the theft from those in younger age groups. So one of the things that we talk about a lot is how this impacts victims and their families. But what we don't talk as much about is how it's impacting your communities. So the average loss to the victims is around $40,000 for older adults. And we took that and estimated if the victim had that much money that wasn't stolen from them, what could they have done into their local economy? And what we found is that it's 65 years worth of tithing to your local church. It's 8 years worth of groceries. It's about 9 years of utility costs for that victim, 4.5 years of discretionary spending, your local airports, your Uber drivers, your rental cars, all those types of things, not getting that money into the economy. It's almost 5 years of healthcare expenses, and it's about 1.5 years of your housing costs. These numbers are the amount lost in the different types of scams that are being perpetrated in your communities. On the left are the crime type by victim loss, and on the right is how much is being lost by age group. And that age group is a smaller number just because not all reporting actually includes age. So just to give you an idea. So a little bit earlier, we talked about, okay, so have we seen a Bitcoin ATM in our community? Do we know what ones are? These are an indication of where Bitcoin ATMs are in North Dakota. If you actually open up your phone and search Bitcoin near me, Bitcoin ATM near me, you can find the closest one and kind of get an idea of what they look like. In 2023, this is what the landscape looked like in crypto kiosk legislative action. So in California and Connecticut, they passed some legislation regulating ATMs. The states that you see on your screen that are striped had some guidance through their money transmitter laws that basically said that kiosk operators needed to register in their state. At the end of 2023, we started to get involved. So our Fraud Watch network, they receive about 2,000 calls every week. That's about 100,000 calls a year. And what they started to see was a significant increase of crypto kiosk fraud reports. And they talked to us and the Obviously team and said, what can we do to help stop this? We're seeing so many more victims. We're seeing the amount of loss go up exponentially. They had this story that they told us of an older woman who was sitting in a convenience store. She wasn't sitting yet. She was standing in a convenience store. She had a bag of cash, $100 bills, and she was feeding it into the kiosk. It took her over 2 hours to feed almost $80,000 in $100 bills into the kiosk. The store clerk felt sorry for her and brought her a chair to sit in so that she can continue putting her money in. And so we went at that point and we looked at what was happening. We looked at the fraud numbers. We looked at We talked with law enforcement, we talked with other stakeholders, we talked to victims, we talked to the industry and said, what can we do to help curb this? And then we wrote model legislation. And so the next year, we had in 2024, we had a lot of states starting to work on this. We passed legislation in 2 additional states, Minnesota and Vermont. And then this is what happened this year. This is largely because ARP got involved. Most of our state offices are involved in this issue. Obviously, your office in North Dakota got very involved, and they were the second state this year to pass something to regulate the kiosks in the state. And we are ready in a lot of the rest of the states that you see that are in gray to pass legislation in 2026. So what are we seeing in other states? You see North Dakota's right in the middle of it. And I know our next speaker will talk a little bit more about what the law was in North Dakota. But these are what other states have passed. So we track some of the most important things that we think are in legislation. That's whether or not money transmitter licensing is required in the state, whether receipts are required in the state, whether there's daily transaction limits in the state. In a lot of states right now, and before these laws passed, you could put in hundreds of thousands of dollars at one given time into the kiosk and transfer it directly to a criminal. So we are limiting that amount that can be put into those transactions, and then whether or not there's a refund in cases of fraud. And so with that, I will turn it back to you, and Janelle, we can answer any questions.
That was really great, Francois. I think you highlighted some of the key points that we were hearing across the state, and really why we came to you with that model legislation. It seems that different states take different paths, but as you were showing from that chart, a lot of things are very similar. But the slide that you showed, and we'll get to a question here shortly, but the slide that you showed, I think the community impact. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because often victims feel they don't want to share their story. They often feel guilty because they fell for a scam. But largely, that is what the criminal wants them to believe. And they think that it's only them that's being impacted. But can you talk a little bit more about that larger impact? I think people are struggling with daily finances right now, and to become a victim of fraud, that really just exacerbates what's going on in their daily life. But
you're right. And the reason why people are not wanting to report fraud, especially older adults, is they feel embarrassed. There's a lot of victim blaming in this issue. In fact, there was a financial writer out of, I think it was the New York Times, who actually wrote about themselves being a victim of a financial scam. And they detailed very well what happened to them, why they did it. And they got such horrible feedback, even I think death threats to them about telling them story. And the other part is that I think older adults also are afraid of having their financial decisions being taken away from them because they were a victim of this type of fraud. So how it impacts others besides the victims. Once your life savings is taken from you, then we hear of people that are homeless after this. We hear of people who commit suicide. And then after that, it has that ripple effect where it impacts your friends, it impacts your family, and then it goes out into the community, because every dollar that is stolen from the victim is stolen out of your community too. And then it actually gets even wider than that, what that money is going to pay for. And that's organized crime. And so your human trafficking, your drug trafficking, those types of things that are happening in your community is happening because money is taken from the victims.
that's very helpful. I think often you feel alone when you're a victim, but once you can see that, it really is compounding so many people in your community. But we do have one question that came in. Is there a legitimate reason to use crypto ATMs?
So the crypto industry will tell us that they are utilized by those who are crypto curious. So those people that want an entry point into investing into cryptocurrency. They are used, they say, by those who are in the cash industry, gig type stuff. So your waitresses that might have cash tips that want to put cash into a kiosk. And then those folks that may have family overseas and want to do a remittance of the funds to a family member in a foreign country. So they can put money into the kiosk and then have that instantly transfer to the family member in another country.
So it does sound like cryptocurrency is the new form of a scam. In recent years, we've heard a lot about folks using gift cards or money orders, but this seems to be the new trend and the new way to get someone to be involved in a scam. So it's, again, another red flag, another way to do it. But is this just a new iteration of criminals finding a new way to scam money out of folks?
Yeah, and then we go back to those payment methods. So this is the newest payment method that the criminals are using because there's no friction in the process. So you go to your bank, you pull out your cash, you go to the kiosk, there's nobody there asking questions. You put your money in, and then the money is instantly transferred to the criminal from there. So there's no friction in that process. No one to stop the transaction, no one to ask questions. And it's very easy to move large amounts of money through this mechanism.
Wow, I think that's really highlights the reason ARP got involved in this work, both at the national level. We thank you very much. You and Clark were really instrumental in helping us work side by side with our partners in the state to help pass the legislation here. But I think that's a really great pivot point to look at why ARP got involved in the state and why it's something that we're going to pivot to Jan to talk a little bit more about. So again, Francois, thanks again for presenting such great information, and we hope you can stay on.
Will do. Thank you.
With that, Jan, Department of Financial Institutions was one of our many partners that we worked with during the North Dakota legislative session in 2025. Again, the Department of Financial Institutions was looking at a similar legislation. We brought ourselves to the table as well as the banking industry and the independent community banks, but we really wanted to have a robust conversation about how can we find the best law that could look at really enhancing the consumer protections. I think bottom line, we were all there for a very similar reason. We wanted to make sure that consumers weren't taking money out of their bank and inserting it into a largely unregulated industry, into cryptocurrency, and really losing that money to fraud. And welcome. Most folks, when laws get passed, we don't know what happens after that. So I think you're going to highlight today really the importance of why the Department of Financial Institutions partnered with us and others across the state, and then kind of where we're at in terms of implementing the new law that was passed in early spring of this year. Dan, welcome.
Thank you so much, Janelle. Thank you for the invitation, for being here today. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you all today. My name is Jan Murtha. I work for the North Dakota Department of Financial Institutions, and I'm also a lawyer. So I'm telling you that for two reasons. One, if you ask me any questions and I begin the answer to those questions with, it all depends. I just want you to know that's why. But also, I've been practicing in North Dakota, my third state of practice, and spent more than 20 years working for governmental entities and focusing in the finance area. And I will say that my current area of purview is the regulations of entities that don't fit neatly into the box of a bank or a credit union. And that's where crypto is, right? It's one of these items, the money transmitters that facilitate the exchange of virtual currency fall into this kind of area of financial regulation that is very quickly evolving. And that's what we're going to talk a bit about today. We've talked a little bit about what crypto ATMs are, but what are North Dakota's consumer protections that we have in place, especially those that went into effect this last legislative session. So the topics I'm going to cover with you today, just a review, what are crypto ATMs, or as they are referred to in our law, virtual currency kiosks, a little background on virtual currency and kiosks and their evolution and entry into the marketplace, how they are regulated in North Dakota, what changed with House Bill 1447, which is the legislation that we've been referring to, and why it matters from a consumer protection standpoint. Now, I don't know about you, but I love to read books. I love a good story. I do not like starting in the middle of the story and reading to the end. You can do it and you can probably catch up, but I really like starting at the beginning to understand where you're at and where you're going. And so before we jump into crypto ATMs, I wanted to go back just a little bit in time and talk about where cryptocurrency begins, because crypto ATMs are really, that's like opening probably what's going to be the first book in the series, right? It's like opening it in the middle, but we're going to go back in time and it really gives you a little bit of perspective on how we got to where we're at now and why it is a consumer protection concern. once there was a white paper. So on Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency that went out into the market. It was launched at the beginning of 2009, January, February 2009. But prior to its launch, a white paper was published. So on October 31st, 2008, a white paper entitled Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, was released under the name Satoshi Nakamoto. So I'm going to introduce several caveats to that one statement. First, when I say published, I am referring to it going up on being available online. When I say white paper, that's what it refers to itself as. But if I have any educators or retired educators on the call and you go in and you read this paper and you come back and say, Jen, that's not a white paper, I understand where you might look at that, because a white paper is generally considered a well-researched paper that the author or authors looked into and provides a lot of substantive background for a new concept or area that they're exploring. This particular paper is 9 pages long. If you are interested in investing in cryptocurrency or involving yourself, I would really encourage you to read this paper, because it's only 9 pages. It's available on the internet. It only has 8 references. And for a paper on technology or software technology being released in 2008, only one of those 8 references was subsequent to the year 2000. So it was really a paper that talks about this new software product, Bitcoin, or this electronic cash system. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, you're not being very nice to poor Satoshi. What's interesting about that, the phrasing of this slide is not an accident. It is generally accepted that Satoshi Nakamoto is a pseudonym. We don't actually know the identity of the person or persons that authored this paper, put it out, even though the wealth to the Bitcoin total attributed to this name is significant. We don't actually know who this person is. So the paper proffered this. It proffered a framework for an electronic payment system based upon cryptographic proof instead of trust, allowing any 2 parties to transact directly with each party without the need for a trusted third party. When this paper was talking about a trusted third party, they're referring to banks. They're referring to your financial or credit unions, your financial institutions, your traditional banking mechanisms. So what they're offering is a way to work outside of financial institutions by trading something that is not related, government backed, related to any type of actual currency. So at the time, it was a very novel concept, right? Like when it gets put out there, it's basically a bartering system, but with something that was intangible. And the reason why that's important, it was created to exist outside of a regulatory regime. Now, you can ask yourself right now, is it an accident or coincidence that this came out at the end of 2008, beginning of 2009, right at the time when we look at the global economic framework and the fact we're going into a big recession and people might not be very trusting of their financial institutions at that time? You can answer that question yourself. But be that as it may, this system was a way to operate and exchange value without worrying about regulations, without worrying about boundaries. So how it grew from novel to networked. So at first, virtual currency was synonymous. And what that means is we tend to use the phrase anonymous. The blockchain itself in any virtual currency is transparent because it has to be in order for it to work. So it's out there, but what is considered the blockchain is letters and numbers. It's a pseudonym for one individual wallet to another individual wallet. You don't necessarily know who's behind it. Somewhere somebody does, but you're not going to see that on the blockchain. So it's synonymous. You can use it without financial institutions, again, largely unregulated. When Bitcoin first launched, it was worth 0. And in fact, I think the story goes that the first real world transaction where Bitcoin was exchanged for something tangible was in 2010. A gentleman traded 10,000 Bitcoins for 2 Papa John's pizzas. So the going rate of Bitcoin today, I believe, is 93,000 approximately per Bitcoin. So they were pretty expensive pizzas at the time. So Anyway, so obviously the value has increased, but it's a value that people assign to it. It's not necessarily tied to anything. So now what we've seen is an evolution of cryptocurrencies. Now you have things like stable coins, which are tied to currencies. You have things like gold-backed crypto, which is tied to a certain gold amount. So the cryptocurrencies have really evolved from the original Bitcoin, to there's different reports to thousands to millions. They're all over and being used increasingly. The greater the consumer use, the greater the industry and government interest. So now pseudonymity is still present, but both industry and governments are more involved, and they're trying to find ways to provide greater access for consumers to be involved in cryptocurrency. Enter our kiosks. So virtual currency kiosks, the role of the Department of Financial Institutions. Virtual currency kiosks or crypto ATMs are physical kiosks, as we've discussed, that convert traditional currency into virtual currency. However, you should be aware that traditional ATMs can also have a cryptocurrency functionality. So you could have an existing ATM, and that's what we're starting to see, that has now partnered with a transmitter that has uploaded the appropriate software to provide for the purchase of cryptocurrency at the same machine that you're also able to withdraw funds from your bank. They not only look very similar, they can be the exact same machine. A virtual currency kiosk operator is regulated as a money transmitter under North Dakota law and has to apply for a money transmission to operate in the state. Now, that was true prior to 2025. They would have been interpreted to be money transmitters. What the 2025 legislation did, which we're going to talk about more, is really clarified that no, this means U2 kiosks, and there are additional protections that are in place if you're going to be a money transmitter, but additional consumer protections that are applicable, and fraud prevention efforts that you need to engage in if you're going to be a money transmitter that's operating kiosks in the state. The North Dakota Department of Financial Institutions licenses and examines money transmitters operating in North Dakota, which means that we also investigate unlicensed activity and receive consumer or set up to receive and investigate consumer complaints with regards to the use of virtual currency kiosks. So what is House Bill 1447? House Bill 1447 passed this last legislative session. For those of you who really like going and reading North Dakota law, you can go onto the North Dakota legislative website, and it's found under Chapter 1309.1, which is the money transmission chapter. Now, it was added into the provisions of House Bill 1447 were added into 1309.1. So it's not, that is related entirely to money transmission, and it's not specific to virtual currency kiosks. It created additional operating fraud prevention requirements for kiosk operators and provided guidance to industry, and again, those additional protections for consumers. The key consumer protections, and there are many, so I'm not going through them all today for you. We're not going to have slides with century code on them, and we're going to go section by section, but just to highlight some of the biggies, or the big consumer protections, I should say, in that bill was the $2,000 daily transaction limit per customer. Now, please be aware that just because this limit is in there and the kiosk should provide it, how those kiosks are identifying who is a customer, we're still learning. So if a scammer, fraudster tries to convince you to use a machine, there are ways to get around the daily limit by potentially creating separate wallets, separate accounts, and going up to that daily limit with each of those accounts. So please, it's not foolproof. So please be aware of that. There are specific fraud warnings that are required in statute. They have to be displayed on the machine, either externally or on the screen as you're going through to process the transaction. And there has to be live customer service from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. Central Time. So our rollout, what is our plan? How are we implementing this? The department has responsibility to, again, license money transmitters, but also we have a part of our mission is to educate consumers on financial literacy and fraud prevention. And so right now we're in the license renewal period where licensees, they have to annually renew every year. And there is a 2-month period, November through December, where they're either renewing license or applying for new license so that they can be licensed for 2026. There are additional requirements in the law for reporting from kiosk operators. We are making those requests as part of this renewal process. One of the additional requirements is they are supposed to report to us each and every location of a kiosk in North Dakota. I saw that map. I know there's going to be that was in the prior presentation. There's going to be many more locations for those kiosks in North Dakota. We don't have them all yet. We should have them again by the end of the renewal period, and they're supposed to update those as they add them. So we're making those additional requests from our licensees, both existing and new entrants. In addition to that, we're currently developing the materials for our consumer education campaign. We're going to be posting by January here next month, FAQs for both consumers and industry, because on our page, we actually have several FAQs currently that exist for industry. They're the ones that are most frequently reaching out to us actually to ask about license requirements, what they need to know, about checklists. So the more information we can give them, the more information they can give us through the license process. So separate from that, we're developing FAQs for consumers, things that we believe are those individuals using the machines would like or need to know. I did see a question in the chat about who regulates the money transmitters or kiosks in the state. That would be the Department of Financial Institutions. I will say, I noticed the phrasing of the question involved where they can be placed. We don't actually get to regulate where they're placed. We just get to know where they're placed. Now, how do we find out if somebody is in the state and operating without a license? Usually through consumer complaints or observation. So if somebody puts a kiosk up in North Dakota and doesn't apply for a license with the department, we're a very small department. We're not going to know. We don't have somebody, examiners or investigators at every gas station. So we're not going to know about those machines unless somebody tells us or an examiner does happen to observe and see that one is there. Just so you're aware, we might have a list, but it may not be a complete list. In fact, it's probably statistically improbable that it will be complete. Going on to February through April, we're going to be developing those additional materials and posting them on our website and on YouTube, education videos, more information about the rollout. And then with any good policy rollout, after you roll it out, you got to take a look and see how effective it was and how well you did, and if more questions arose that you need to answer. And we're scheduled to do that in August so that we can get materials updated in advance of the license renewal period for industry, and also continue to develop our materials for consumers. So best practices for fraud prevention. As I was talking about, we only know where kiosk locations are and who's operating them if somebody applies for a license, or we find out through another means, usually through a complaint, that there's an operator out there that is here in North Dakota and doesn't have a license. You can verify a financial service provider, not just money transmitter, but several other type of financial service providers, payday lenders, collection agencies, that type of thing, through NMLSconsumeraccess.org. So if you go onto that website, this resource allows you to confirm whether or not that entity or person is licensed to operate in North Dakota. Scam awareness. Now, you talked a little bit about this with the prior presenter. I just want to reaffirm that this tool, the crypto ATM's virtual currency kiosk, it's a new tool, but it's an old technique. Scams follow a pretty consistent format. There's a variety of scams, don't get me wrong, from raising money for a fraudulent cause to someone telling you your bank account's been compromised and you need to pull it out, like in the video, to a variety of different scams. But they tend to follow a very similar pattern. You're contacted by someone you don't know or trust. They attempt to create a false sense of urgency regarding a problem you were unaware of. They urge you to withdraw a large amount of cash and get it to them somehow. Now, in the past, the way we've seen some of these scams being operated is, for example, gift cards. Gift cards are not inherently bad, especially around the holidays. If you want to give someone a gift, right, you might buy them a gift card. But gift cards were a way for, and have been a way for, fraudsters to get money from people and use them and not have it be traceable. Similarly with cashier's check. Several years ago, I know there was, and it's probably still circulating today, a big scam involving the IRS, where people would call and pretend to be an IRS agent and say, oh, you're overdue on your taxes, and IRS agents are going to come after you unless you pay this money, right? And then creating this. In fact, I'll share with you just a quick story. My own mom was contacted by one of these fraudsters and she called me, and this is a well-educated, smart, financially savvy woman who has somebody else taking care of, a financial advisor taking care of her investments, somebody else, an accountant, taking care of her tax filing. And she's contacted by an individual that says, something's wrong with her taxes and she better meet this person on the steps of the courthouse with a cashier's check that's several $1,000s worth, or IRS agents are coming to her house. And she reaches out to me, her lawyer daughter, right, and says, Jan, I don't know what's going on. I always file my taxes through the accountant. She didn't reach out to the accountant. She reached out to me, which she could have reached out to her accountant too, but I was happy she did. And I told her, Mom, this is a scam, that somebody's trying to defraud you. And even then, this person had so aggravated her that she didn't believe me right away. And we had to walk through. I said, did you get anything in the mail? No, this is not the way the IRS contacts you. I promise you, this is a scam. And this person was supposed to call her back, and they were supposed to meet at the courthouse steps at a certain point in time. And I said, Mom, do not answer that call. And you don't know my mom, but I'll tell you, probably can recognize the personality. She said, I'm going to answer that call. I'm going to give this person a piece of my mind. She sure did, right? She told the fraudster exactly what she thought of them and hung up the phone. But how easy that involves somebody trying to trick her into meeting at the courthouse steps with a cashier's check. How easy would it be now with a crypto ATM if for someone who had that same scam, the same IRS scam, to convince them to withdraw money and put it in a crypto ATM? And if we go back to what cryptocurrency was and how it was created, right? It was created to exist outside of a regulatory regime. It is difficult because of that pseudonymity to track and trace, to find those fraudsters. So much more difficult and requires much less contact than meeting someone in person or giving them an address to send something to. Now they can have it done all virtually in a way that is very difficult to trace. And so the crypto ATM is a tool. It's not the scam itself. It is a tool that fraudsters can use, but the scams follow a very similar pattern. So just be alert and be aware of those. And if somebody is creating a false, or I should say, somebody's contacting you about a problem that you had no idea about, that's when you should pause. Because usually you're going to know about things in advance, and you're not going to find out the first time that there's a problem with your bank account, with the court, with the IRS, with a family member from an unknown person on a telephone call, right? It's usually going to come through a different way. So say you do think you've been a victim of a scam. There are several next steps that you can take. First, you contact your local law enforcement agency to report it. So if you believe it, it's getting over that first, oh no, if there's any embarrassment, it's getting over that and reaching out. You can also file a complaint with our department, with the Department of Financial Institutions. In fact, that picture on the slide is a picture of the tab on our website. If you go to our website, it's one of 6 tabs that you can select. It'll take you directly to a complaint form. That complaint form will go right into our portal, and you can file it with us. You can also file a complaint with the North Dakota Attorney General. They have a consumer protection division, and the website for that is on here as well. So several options for filing. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Wow, Jen, that was great. I think your story about your mom, I think so many of us have heard stories just like that. And so I think it really, that sense of urgency, I think that's been threaded through the conversation throughout this last hour, is that's what they want you to do. They want you to act without thinking, because they create that sense of urgency. They create that stress level. So I think your mom's story really highlighted and captured all of that in one breath. The thing that I think was important about reporting piece, I think you covered it in your slides about part of the consumer protection pieces in the recent legislation, but reporting to law enforcement, a key piece in that legislation was that receipts are required. Is that a key piece that folks need to make sure that they get to the law enforcement? Cryptocurrency is all done so virtual. What would be the key piece of having that receipt?
Any documentation that you can provide will assist law enforcement. So the receipt is one. The entities themselves, the kiosk vendors, are supposed to have software and policies in place that if we ask, they should be able to provide all of the addresses that are associated with that transaction, with that machine. So they should be able to do that, right? That's one of the requirements in the new law. So both documentation from them, but the receipt is your physical documentation for that transaction, keeping that for a period of time after the transaction, just in case, is very helpful.
That's really helpful. I think the only other question that we had early on, and I think you covered it in terms of these crypto kiosks being licensed in the state. So you can't just by looking at one, know whether or not it's licensed. If you come upon one of these at your local grocery store, you'd go to that website, right, to see if they've been licensed in the state?
Absolutely. If you go to that NMLS Consumer Access website, you're going to be able to see if that machine or vendor has a active license in North Dakota. And if they don't, perhaps don't use it.
That's always a good tip. I think we tell everybody if it doesn't feel right, if you've got a sense of this doesn't seem right, it's always good to ask some questions and not to act before you maybe talk to somebody or ask some additional questions or just stop responding. So we did have a question come in from one of our participants. So how much work is being done in sending undercover victims out to help potentially trap scammers?
We've actually had a couple of examiners in our agency to volunteer to say, hey, can I go check out these crypto ATMs? Right now, no, that would require far more resources and personnel than we have. We're a pretty small agency. We've got under 40 people. And within our non-depository division, that number is only 10, and we only have 2 examiner investigators for money transmission. We're not going out and checking out all of the ATMs. However, if we get a complaint, somebody goes out and says, there's an ATM here, it looks like this, here's the information, we do follow up on those. And that's how we're able to do it. This is the first couple months of the law being implemented. As the examination program grows, as we get additional information from industry through the licensing and examination process, as we get complaints in, we're going to be able to have an opportunity to evolve our program. It's not like you set it up and it stays. You set it up and you continually look at ways to enhance it and improve upon it. Who knows 5 years from now if we might not have the resources and personnel where we can do things like that. At this time, we don't, but we don't know what the future looks like.
So no undercover operations, but the best thing folks can do is to report it. If they themselves have been a victim or if they know someone that has been a victim, the best thing to do is report it. I think, Francois, I'd like to bring you in. Not that we have undercover operations across the country, but I think there's a unique example of some work that ARP Nebraska has done around engaging folks in this cryptocurrency work. Do you want to share a bit about what we've learned in Nebraska?
ARP Nebraska partnered with the local folks in Omaha to actually put together a fraud squad that they go into the local convenience stores to actually check to make sure that the kiosks within the convenience stores and other locations are actually displaying the fraud notices that was required in their local ordinance there. So they go in, they do education of the local clerks and the stores to make sure they know how to recognize somebody that is a victim of the fraud, and then also making sure that they're following the ordinances. So it's a pretty good partnership between the local city, the law enforcement, and ARP.
Right. That's a great example. I think bottom line, all of our work at ARP really does involve partnerships. And I, again, thank you both, Jan and Francois, for joining us. It's been really informative. And I hope folks have really learned more about cryptocurrency, about ATMs and how to prevent from being scams. And bottom line is reported.